Hello everybody, welcome back. So in this part of the series we're going to look at creating a bullet object, okay, that the player can fire just by clicking the mouse button. We'll be able to click and shoot lots of lovely pretty bullets. The first thing we're going to want to do is very similar to the first tutorial, is we're going to want to make a sprite for our bullet, okay? So right click in sprites just as we did in the previous part, hit create, and I'm going to name it in a very similar way, spr_bullet, okay? I'm going to hit import. And I'm going to choose spr_bullet.png, this bullet, yes, and there we have our bullet sprite. This time, instead of just using this drop down list and putting the origin in the center, I'm actually going to move it so it's kind of on the head of the bullet there, because that's kind of the sort of sphere of our bullet here. Like if we wanted to rotate it, we would like rotate it around that point. This is just sort of trail coming off of the bullet. So that's kind of the center point that we want for this particular sprite. Next thing we're going to do is actually create a object for the bullet, okay? So I'm going to create a blueprint for the bullet instances that our player is going to be able to fire. So right click in objects and hit create. I'll create another object editor down here. I'm going to call this one obj_bullets, just the same as we did with our player. I'm going to make the sprite spr_bullet, and I'm not actually going to add anything in here just yet, okay? I'm going to go over to the player, so double click on obj_player, let's reopen him. You can see we've got all of the logic and events that we set up before are all still here. So what we're going to do is inside the step event, which is again the event that happens every single frame of the game, we're going to check to see if the mouse button, just the left mouse button, is being pressed, and if it is, we're going to create an instance of obj_bullet wherever our mouse happens to be. Okay, so over here where it says mouse and keyboard, you can say if mouse down, so if a button on the mouse is held down currently, okay? So I'm going to drag this in, and you see if mouse down. So button MB left, that represents the left mouse button. If you click this, you can see all the different ones, left mouse button, middle mouse button, right mouse button, any button, and so on. They all have different sort of constants that represent those particular mouse buttons. We just want the left mouse button. You can also tick this not button to sort of check the reverse of that and see if the mouse button is not held down, etc. But we want to know if it is held down. So if that mouse button is held down, and then in instances where you see the light bulb, that's for creating an object instance. Okay, so creating an instance of an object, and now I'm going to drag that to here. Okay, so you see this sort of line that's sort of drawn between if mouse down and create object instances, just in the same way that set point direction leads to this. That just sort of suggests a direct flow of this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. But we want to kind of bind this particular action to only happen if this is true. So if this has actually happened, do this, but if this hasn't happened, skip it and move on to the next thing. So what we do is drag this to the right hand side of the action. You can see this little blue rectangle up here, and you'll see the line changes to a sort of green line there. Okay, so that means that this will only happen if this actually returns true. It's kind of part of a code block, if you will. Okay, so here where it says object in the create object instance, click that button there and just select obj_bullet. We don't want to create more of the player, although that would be kind of interesting, I suppose. In X and Y, we're going to use the same constants we used in the first tutorial where we decided to find our mouse coordinates, okay? So I'm just going to type mouse, and you can see it comes up with all the different mouse things. I'm just going to type mouse X, and for Y, I'm going to type mouse_Y. Don't worry about layer, target, or temp for now, although we'll come back to layer in a moment. What this will do is it'll just create an instance of the bullet at our mouse X and our mouse Y coordinates, but only if we're pressing the button. Otherwise it would just create it every single frame wherever our mouse was, which isn't what we want. Okay, so let's run the game now and see exactly what happens. So here we have our game as before. Okay, nothing seems to have changed, but then if I press the left mouse button and just sort of drag the mouse around, you'll notice I can sort of draw vibrant, pretty images with the left mouse button, okay? Which, you know, this could be a game in its own right. You don't have to necessarily create a game about shooting things. You could create some sort of fancy art game with GameMaker if you want. It's really up to you. But This is how you create new instances of objects using DnD. Okay, it's this create object instance, and it's doing that every single frame at the moment that we're holding this down. But we'll come to that in a bit. Okay, so the first thing we want to change about this is instead of just creating these instances at the mouse coordinates, we're just going to create them wherever our object itself happens to be in the room, wherever our player instance is. Okay, so instead of mouse x and y, I'm just going to write x and y. Okay. That's literally just going to grab the x coordinate of the instance running this code and the y coordinate of the instance currently running this code, okay? So our player object basically is going to create them wherever our player currently is. Okay, now we finally want to actually make some changes to the bullet object, because we create these bullets at the moment, but they don't do anything. They just sort of sit there. They don't actually fire, so we want to actually make them fire in a particular direction. So let's go to our bullet object now. Let's add the step event. Actually, let's just add the create event first of all, because I think I think this is all we'll need for this one. So what we're going to do here is first of all set our direction. And remember back in our player object where we adjusted our direction using set point direction and then changed the image angle using that direction. We're going to do the same thing here. So what we're going to do is change our point direction to be mouse x and mouse y. And because we're doing this in the create event, this will only happen once, just in the first frame that the object is actually made, okay? Because we don't need to update this every single frame. We just need to set the direction and the speed once and then just let the bullet fly off. It'll do its own thing. Okay, so now we've done that, the next thing we want to do is actually give the instance some speed. Okay, so let's find in movement speed. Okay, it's just this little icon, 3 arrows. Type direction. Okay, so it's just going to take whatever our current direction is and it's going to have speed in that direction. And we're going to set that speed to be 16, okay, 16 pixels a frame. Be way faster than our player actually moves around. So now let's just run the game and just sort of see what happens here, because it's an interesting point to demonstrate. So I can move around, and if I click, I can now create these bullets and they fire off. But you notice how the sprite isn't changing direction. Okay, the sprite itself isn't changing angle, and that's just simply because we haven't told it to. We've given it a direction for the instance in order to set our speed, but we haven't changed the actual direction of the sprite. Okay, so if you didn't understand why I had to sort of set 2 different directions to change the image sprite's rotation in the player object, this is why. Okay, and this is why sometimes you might want those 2 things to be separate. Okay, but here we don't. So let's go to instances and find set instance rotation. Let's just drag this in and set our instance rotation to be whatever our current direction is. Okay, we can move that up there as well, just so we keep our direction things all up there and keep our speed down here. Now if I run this again, you can see now they actually point the right direction. Now you might be noticing the obvious problem with this, and that's that the bullets actually appear over the top of the player. Okay, that's because we're creating everything on the same layer at the moment. Okay, we're creating everything on just our default instances layer that our room generates for us. If I go to room 0 and if I bring back the room editor layer view over here, okay. So instances and background, those are our only 2 layers. You can use layers in GameMaker Studio 2, they're new to GameMaker Studio 2, these weren't in 1.x. You can use layers to rearrange the order in which things are drawn to the screen, okay? So what we want is a layer that appears below our player object. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this layer. So I'm going to rename the layer to be our player layer, okay? In fact, I'm going to name it layer underscore player. Easier. And I'm also going to go down here where it says create a new instances layer. I'm going to click that and create a new instances layer. I'm going to call this one layer underscore bullet, okay, and drag that underneath the layer player there, so this little line appears and it moves just like that. So now our bullet layer is below our player layer, and if I go ahead and drag an instance of this into the room now, oh, oops, I've placed it on the player layer. If I select that layer first and then drag an instance of this object into the room, you can see it appears below that layer. And if I put them like that, and if I now rearrange those layers, So if I move this down under here, you'll see the bullet's now on top. And we can now see the bullet is back underneath, okay? Okay, so let's get rid of this bullet instance here. Okay, because we don't need it, we just need to have this particular layer ready. So let's go back to our player object. Now where we're creating this bullet instance, okay, when we're holding the mouse button, instead of targeting the layer instances, let's target the layer underscore bullets. Okay, and we can see, make sure it's spelled correctly just by comparing it to layer editor over there. Now if I run the game now, what we should see is the bullets appear underneath the player object. Okay, we can create a lovely kind of fireworks display now. Now, the only other problem remaining with this is that currently our bullets fire every single frame of the game, okay? So, like, every single frame that we're holding the left mouse button, a new bullet is spawned, okay? Meaning we don't have any control over sort of our firing rate. And that's not good. So what we're going to do is fix that, and we're going to create a variable that we'll use to give the bullet firing a bit of a cooldown, so we can actually adjust the rate at which it fires. You might want it to fire every single frame in your game, it's up to you. But I'm just going to show you now how you can have a bit of control over that. So let's come back to our player object. Okay, let's close the remitter. We don't need the layers view anymore. And our player object. Okay, let's add a new event. Let's add the create event this time. Okay, so just when this object is made for the first time, or when an instance of it is made, rather. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a variable. Okay, so you see this in common under here. I've got assign variable. So I'm going to drag this into place. Okay, so assign variable, we give it a name and a value. Now, there's nothing to really be scared of. All a variable is a word that is a number. Okay, that's the easiest way to think of it. And what I'm going to do is going to make this word cooldown, and I'm going to give it a value of 0. So that means, okay, we've created the word cooldown. Okay, is now important to this instance, and it represents the number 0. So any other time in any of our other logic we refer to the word cooldown, we're actually referring to the number 0. Now, why on earth would you want to do that? Well, because of, well, it's the clue is in the name, variable. We can actually change this on the fly to mean various different numbers, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to change cooldown to 3 every time we fire, and make it so we can only fire if cooldown is less than 1. And then every frame will tick cooldown down by 1, so it reduces by 1 every frame until it's 0. Okay, so we get this constant sort of 3, 2, 1, 0 fire, 3, 2, 1, 0 fire behavior of our player object, rather than just fire, fire, fire every frame. Okay, so let's go back now to our step event. Okay, so just click over here and back to where we're actually creating this bullet. So at the moment we just check to see if the mouse is down, and then we fire the bullet. But we want to do more than that. We want to check to see if the mouse is down and if cooldown is less than 1, which it currently is. It's 0. Okay, so in common, what we want to do is say if variable. Okay, so this sort of flowchart symbol, sort of 2 branching paths, that says if variable, and it says check if a variable satisfies a condition, which is exactly what we want. So let's drag this and put this in here, and drag this to the side of here, because we want to create a new chain. So we'll say if this is true, and then if this is true, do this. Okay, so if the variable cooldown, which we set earlier, is less than 1. In fact, it might be easier to just say less than or equal to 0, okay? And that's just a check to make sure that if it went into minus numbers, which it probably will with the way we're going to set it up, that this still works, okay? But we want it to be 0 or less. So it's currently checking to see if the mouse is clicked. If cooldown, the word is less than 0, is less than or equal to 0, then fire the object. But currently, that's always going to be true, because we set cooldown to be 0 in the create event, right? So what we want to do is change cooldown after we fire a bullet. So after we fire a bullet, what we want to do is say assign variable again, okay? Just the same thing we used before. Because cooldown already exists, what we're going to do is overwrite what we've already put into cooldown with a new number. So I'm going to set cooldown to be 3. Okay, if I typed is relative, it would add 3 onto what it currently is, rather than just setting it to 3. But we want to just set it to be 3. Okay, The sort of green line there means it's still part of this this if logic statement. Okay. So now that we've done that, if we were to run the game now, you'd find we would be able to fire once and then never again, because the cooldown would always be set to 3, right? So what we want to do now is set cooldown to be to reduce itself by 1 every single frame. So go back to common here with assign variable again, okay, and drag this over to the left. And you're going to make sure it appears down here, okay, because we want this to happen regardless of the sort of sequence of logic we've got going on here. Let's make this a bit bigger so we can kind of see more of what's going on in here, because we've got quite a few steps going on now in here. So we can see a bit more of that now. And if I bring this up over here as well, you can see there's kind of a summary of our step event so far. So you can see, and you can see also the sort of the branching logic. So set direction towards mouse X, mouse Y, set rotation to direction. If the left mouse button is down, if cooldown is less than or equal to 0, do this, create object bullets at XY, set cooldown to 3, and then back to just doing this stuff regardless, okay? So back down here, if you've accidentally dragged this here and you find that there's a green line connecting this, that's not where you want it to be. So just drag it and see where the blue rectangle appears below if mouse down, just let go there and you'll find it sort of connects there, which is how we want it to be, okay? So assign variable cooldown to be -1 is relative ticked, okay? So that's going to subtract 1 from whatever cooldown currently is. So if it's 0, it's going to go to -1. If it's -1, it's going to go to -2 forever. And like it'll just keep counting down like that. But if it's 3, it'll go down to 2, and if it's 2, it'll go down to 1, and so on and so forth. So basically what that means is every time we shoot, we'll set this number back to 3. And then every single frame we reduce that number by 1. So like we check to see if we can fire. We see, is that number less than 0? If it less than or equal to 0, if it is, fire, set this number back to 3. So we get a 3, 2, 1 cycle every time we're for every frame we're sort of holding the left mouse button down. So to actually see this in action now, let's run the game. And if I hold the left mouse button, you can see we're not firing quite as frequently as we used to. Okay, it might be a little bit hard to tell the difference because I've used quite a small number for cooldown, but there is definitely a difference in the spacing there. But if I make this more pronounced, so say if I assign cooldown to be 10, that means we would have to wait 10 frames for this to count down all the way back down to 0 in order for us to be able to fire again. So you can see now that I'm holding the left mouse button, we're firing much, much less frequently. And then you can change and play with that value to make it more or less whatever you want. I'm going to keep it at about 4 because I think that's a reasonable sort of firing rate. You can set that to whatever particular value you would like it to be. Okay. So there you go. That's how you make our players shoot projectiles. Next up, we're going to look at actually creating something to shoot at. Okay, so that'll be exciting. Catch you guys next time. Hope you're enjoying this so far. Thanks for watching, guys.